Um, which is arguably the game that every Resident Evil fan wants remaking. They want Code Veronica remaking, not Code Veronica X or any of that. The original Code Veronica in its original form. I believe Code Veronica X had some balancing and some changes to the game. I can't really remember what, but and then there's Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 6 is never getting a remake. It might get a re-release, maybe with upscaled 4K graphics or something. A very, very quick and easy fix for the game to run on modern technology more than anything. But it's never going to get a full remake. So the two options are Code Veronica or Resident Evil 5. And like I say, I don't see Code Veronica getting a remake realistically.
Anniversary, it's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remakes into the series' weakest era, an era of gameplay and narrative decisions best left in the past.
I would argue against that. I quite enjoyed Resident Evil 6. It is an unpopular game, but I didn't mind Resident Evil 6 so much. I quite enjoyed the different style of gameplay it gave. And RE5's co-op was pretty good. The game itself was a bit lackluster, but the co-op wasn't too bad.
Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so the answer is not to remake, but to rewrite.
Why? I still don't know why.
Yeah, the co-op was good.
Resident Evil is a survival horror series. Not that you'd know that playing Resident Evil 5. Sure,
Is it fucking stupid of me that every single time that I see a bridge, I think of PewDiePie? It's been like 7 or 8 years, and I still see it, and I'm like, I remember whenever he said the thing.
Sure.
I don't remember that. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Constant flow of horrific imagery, but Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. That's evident in its cover shooter mechanics, vehicle chases with arm rails turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experienced mass popularity in the late 2000s.
Sure.
See, when Resident Evil 5 came out, it did make me feel like it was very much a similar vein to, like, you remember Army of Two? There was a game called Army of Two. Oh, did he? I don't recall that. Okay. Okay, I understand why now. Thanks for the context. I don't recall that. But yeah, Resident Evil 5 made me feel like it was like a really solid version of Army of Two, realistically.
It all speaks to a series that had lost its way, rather than reflect on the tenets that were the foundation of its
PUBG. Oh, right. No, I don't.
5 looked to the
I don't recall.
gaming zeitgeist in an attempt to find a new lease of life. The result is an unholy
But,
hybrid
yeah.
of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty.
Well, I mean, I think this is fair for him to say. Absolutely. If he's saying that, like, basically, was Resident Evil 5 did they try to, like, do, like, what Halo 4 did? Where they made, like, loadouts and they tried to make Halo more like Call of Duty? Is that kind of the issue? Is not the gameplay? Yeah, because like I don't know if that's really it's the only good co-op Resident Evil. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it is true. It is literally the only good co-op Resident Evil. Realistically, six was all right. It was all right. The actual story itself was not good, very good co-op. It was actually the DLC that ended up being good on co-op on Resident Evil 6. Believe it or believe it not. It was the endless mode, the horde mode, that was pretty good playing co-op on Resident Evil 6, which I'm pretty sure was DLC if I remember right. I can't remember exactly, but it may not have been. It may have been unlockable. I can't remember. But Resident Evil 5 is pretty much the only good Resident Evil co-op game outside of I think it was like the PS2 ones that were I've got wind tonight, that were playable over the network adapter. What were they called? Were they called like case files or something? Oh, Revelations is pretty good co-op as well, actually. But this was Revelation. Oh, was Revelations one before this? I can't remember. Outbreak, that's it. Resident Evil Outbreak. Resident Evil Outbreak was the game that basically had, I think it was 4-player co-op, and every character had different traits. I think it was PS2. It might have been PS3. I can't remember. But basically, you had to pick a group of characters that were able to complete a scenario. So one might be able to unlock one door, one might be able to do pick lock another, and so on. One might have an antidote, so you could fight a particular monster. If I remember rightly, they all had like different traits and stuff. It was like very early, sort of loadout based co-op game. It was very early in the network gaming era, shall we say?
As ugly and unwieldy as it sounds.
Well, especially for consoles,
This
anyway.
design appears to not just be a misguided attempt to follow Western successes, but also a misreading of its predecessor. With Resident Evil 4, director Shinji Mikami deftly reinvented the series through the use of a new over-the-shoulder camera angle. The perspective allowed for a more kinetic, action-heavy game. Despite this, Mikami never lost sight of the terror at the core of Resident Evil. Through the use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension and fear, and the inclusion of Ashley as your vulnerable charge, combat encounters were focused on surviving overwhelming horrors rather than dominating foes.
Having seen Resident Evil 4 speedruns, we all know that's not the case now. You can run through pretty much all of the game. You do not have to take on that many encounters in Resident Evil 4 realistically, even with Ashley.
Resident Evil 5, meanwhile, presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. Their purpose is cannon fodder.
That sounds like a game that I would like. I remember I didn't like playing Resident Evil because I had to always think about how much ammo I had, and I thought that was really boring. And I was like, I want to play a game where it's like me versus 1,000 zombies, and I have a machine gun with infinite ammo and a lightsaber.
That would pretty much be World War Z now. However, there's, I suppose, no more heroes. It's not really zombies, but there's no more heroes. That would be your two options. Oh, Dead Rising. There's a lightsaber in Dead Rising.
That's all. And like maybe I can get in a car, basically to him. Yeah, I know.
Or Left 4 Dead.
That's
Left 4 Dead would be a good shout.
Well, it's not. It's a survival game. I know. It's not Resident Evil. Like, it's the same thing I said about Assassin's Creed, right? Is that I don't like the aesthetic of Assassin's Creed. I don't like the gameplay of it. Like, I don't like the whole stealth, hiding, sneaking around. Like, I think it's cringe. So whenever I saw that, like, Valhalla kind of appealed to me, I would actually even see that as an L. Because an Assassin's Creed game shouldn't appeal to me. Because I'm not the target audience. And so, yeah, maybe you're right. And I think that, like, yeah, I know that there are people that like that, you know, some people like things I don't like, right? I guess this is one of them.
A wall of meat to slow your progress through levels.
Rising?
And those
Bro, that was
levels
a
are
game.
not
That was a
locations to
game,
be
bro.
explored. Instead,
Yeah.
they are largely
I had that
funnels
on a
that push you
360.
from entrance to exit. Resident Evil 4 may have replaced the series'
Shoot the
traditional
cock.
continuous structure with discrete
Shoot the
levels
cock.
in an attempt to move away from the backtracking.
Oh,
of
Resident
the
Evil 3, what a
previous
game.
games, but it
Jeez.
preserved the spirit of locations like the Raccoon City Police Station. The village, Salazar's castle, and the island feature interlocking explorable pathways
Yeah.
that solidify these locations as authentic spaces rather than obstacle courses. Resident Evil 5
See, I didn't like that. I didn't like that about Resident Evil 4, the fact that there were multiple paths. The reason why is because it didn't feel big enough to pull it off. Now, I'm not saying Resident Evil 4 is a bad game, because it clearly isn't. But even the town area, if you think about it, it's basically 3 lanes. There was the side lane, the middle lane, and this lane kind of thing. And yes, it did have some verticality. But ultimately, you were running around the same circle if you were trying to get away. And it didn't feel as big in terms of the areas as it probably could have been. And I don't know if that's limitation on hardware at the time or something like that. But I felt it like, I mean, I haven't played the remake, so maybe the remake makes it feel a bit nicer, but I felt like it was almost claustrophobic in a way. Which is probably the feeling they were going for, to be fair. What's my missus saying? Hold on. Um. Yeah, so I don't know, weird. It was like weirdly open, but still felt claustrophobic. So, like I said, that might have been the way they were trying to make it feel, because of, as I say, the enemy location and stuff like that. The way it was trying to keep it tense, but it did feel relatively tight.
5 has no interest in this, with the majority of its stages being little more than corridors peppered with dead ends to hide treasures in. Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kajuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion.
Just shoot him in the leg.
All this is to say that a faithful remake of Resident Evil 5 would break Capcom's 7-year streak of brilliant survival horror games. It's telling that the series' reset point, Resident Evil 7, was a reinvention of the very first game, a haunted house that grew ever larger as you unlocked new rooms by solving its puzzles. Clever reinventions of this base conceit is the key to Resident Evil's success, be that dropping
This
an
is the one I
unstoppable
played.
force into the house's
Yeah, I remember
corridors,
playing this
such
one
as
here.
Resident Evil 2's Mr. X, or expanding the scope of the house. Resident Evil Village's titular location is effectively a giant manor. Its corridors are streets, and its rooms are houses. Resident Evil 5's stage
I would disagree with that. I don't think Resident Evil 7 is a giant manor. Resident Evil Village is a giant manor. Resident Evil Village, each location has identity. Like the manor, the underground section, the windmill and the water section. They're all different. They all have different enemies. They all have different identities. They all have different feels and tension rates. I would disagree with that comment. That it's essentially an extension of Resident Evil 1 and 2. Resident Evil 1 is designed to be very much a claustrophobic investigation of a mansion. Resident Evil 2 is very much designed to be an extension of Resident Evil 1's mansion with the police station. You know, it was an investigation of the same event from a different viewpoint at a different point in time. Resident Evil 7 is nothing like Resident Evil 1. It's so much tighter. It's vastly more psychological. Even the remake doesn't. I don't think it gets to the psychological area limits that Resident Evil 7 did, with the house and the family, and the relationships with your wife and stuff like that. And then obviously with Village, that's an extension of number 7, and just expands that to have into this area where it's like you've got the manor, you've got the merchant. Yeah, exactly. Just because they both have large mansions, they both must be the same game. That's completely incorrect. I think IGN have taken an L on that comment. I strongly disagree with that.
driven structure is simply inferior to this design. A modern recreation of it would only further highlight its flaws, especially.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it really kind of depends. I mean, like, some people probably, like, did any of you guys like Resident Evil 5? I never played it, so I'm not sure. But I feel like this is probably the kind of game that, like, some people probably did like, and then other people didn't, and it was just like, maybe it alienated, like, base fans of the game, and so, yeah, I can get that.
I don't think that's necessarily the truth. I mean, obviously, there is a massive difference between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 as a game. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that Resident Evil 4 isn't obviously one of the best Resident Evils in the series. Resident Evil 5 clearly is one of the weaker ones. That's not factually incorrect. But Resident Evil after Resident Evil 4 needed something different. It needed to go in a different direction. After 4 games, it was starting Resident Evil 4. If they'd have done Resident Evil 4 again, people would have been going, oh, this is now the same game. It's game 5. You need to reinvent yourself. So in actual fact, if you want to go down that route, Capcom should really be applauded for trying to reinvent the series. Yes, it didn't work necessarily, but at least they attempted it. They took the L on that one, and they admitted, yeah, okay, it's, you know, we've gone on a different route. We gave it full co-op. Yeah, it needed. I don't know about the word expand. I think expand's probably the wrong word to use. but it needed to maybe reinforce. It needed to bring new features to it. Like Resident Evil 4, like I say, was the fourth or fifth game where basically it was the same game. 4 was it felt a little bit different, but it wasn't quite different enough to keep the series going. It was like Devil May Cry, for example, another Capcom game where by the time we got to Resident Evil 4, we were 3 games in, and then they go and release DMC 4, and we have Dante. I think Dante was DMC 4, if I remember right. I'm pretty sure it was. Not Dante, Nero, sorry. And they released Devil May Cry 4 with Nero, and everybody was like, no, you can't do that. You can't release Devil May Cry and not give us Dante. And then everyone ended up loving Nero. You've got to take risks in game development to make positive changes. And I think that's what Resident Evil 5 was. It was a calculated risk to make positive change in the series. Yes, the risk was maybe a little bit higher, and it didn't quite work. But I do think Capcom are justified in making those changes to the game.
The best co-op and not the best one? Yeah.
Actually coming in such close proximity to masterclasses like the remake of Resident Evil 2. Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, is recognisably
that was cool.
An updated version of the classic RPG,
comparison to that.
but its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart from the 1997
Just say no, I haven't finished Rebirth yet.
original.
Yeah.
And so you could argue that Resident Evil 5 is actually the Resident Evil most in need of a remake. A whole new environmental structure and scenario design that reins in the action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes. But all of this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism.
What?
See, this is where I don't necessarily think it's racism, and not because it's, white on black and stuff like that. I think they just didn't realise at the time the decisions they were making.
Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes.
Well, that's because it's in Africa. I would assume that Ghost of Tsushima, the primary antagonists in that game were probably Japanese, right? Mongols? Okay. Mongols, we get the point? Yeah.
It's technically...
See, the thing with this is the thing that makes this the controversial element is not the fact that they're black people, it's the fact that they're not zombies, if you want my opinion. If there were zombies, and they would just happen to be black because the game was set in Africa, I don't think people would necessarily be saying it's racist, but because they're not technically zombies, it's all of a sudden racist. And I don't think either of them is true, if that makes sense. I don't think Capcom at the time was going, oh, we're going to set it in West Africa, so we need to put token white people in to make it cultural fairness and everything like that. The fact that they wanted to set a game in Africa, they were like, okay, what's the predominant race in Africa? It's black people. So we make the people black people. However, the story protagonists happen to be from America and we're white. I think it's just coincidental. I think it's just literally coincidental. There's literally zero racism involved at all.
The Ouroboros virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting. But the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection. Intentionally...
I mean, there's a lot of places in Africa that are fucking primitive. Like, yeah. That's... no shit. Like, what do you... this is so weird. It's a true... Yeah, it's a literal true statement. It's not racist.
See, I would agree with this. I would 100% agree. That I think it's just coincidental in the fact that yes, they wanted to do this, and now we happen to be going through a period of correction in terms of ESG, or the social element of ESG, shall we say? But at the same time, yeah, I think Asmongold is right as well.
Or not, Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention in the name of global security.
I think that's a stretch.
That's a stretch, isn't it? I feel like that.
That is a stretch. That is definitely a stretch. They had nothing to do with any of that stuff.
It's a bit of a, like, oh my god. That's a huge stretch. Like, don't they have, like, a virus or something like that in, like, the game? I mean, it's not like...
It's literally a guy took the virus to Africa and started using it on the people. Therefore, they needed to send a task force to deal with the person that was doing the virus. That is a 2-line explanation of what happened in Resident Evil 5. So that is what IGN just said there is a massive stretch.
It's not like he's going to Africa and just like shooting all the black people, is he? Like, that's not the game, is it? I'm pretty sure that's not the game. This is crazy. What?
Yeah,
like,
it is crazy.
What's wrong with people? The main villains are white? Yeah, like, so it's 457. I remember looking at this, and some of the villains in here, like these bad guys, some of them were white.
Previous games.
So, like, what is this? The reason is why it was, according to the director, they considered Africa the birth of humanity and wanted to do stuff with that idea. Well, yeah, it's not, I would not say it is, I don't know the current thinking, but whenever I was in school, we were taught that people came from Africa. That's what I learned.
See, I didn't get taught that in high school, but I think based on continental shift and the way the history lines, and it's probably a little bit more accurate that Africa was significantly bigger. But I don't know about that necessarily. I don't think I was taught that at school, if I recall.
Right? Is it, you know, it probably originally came from Africa. So this is actually kind of true. And it's like, if you go, you look at pictures of Africa, there are really nice cities and there's great places in Africa. And there's places that look like this. That's the way it is.
Global security. This insensitive treatment of people of color was hotly debated.
It's crazy.
Even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer, with writers such as Ngai Kroll and Stephen Totillo pointing out the game's uncomfortable post-colonial imagery. The argument...
Post-colonial imagery.
That's a stretch as well.
God, bro, like, somebody needs to stop Western journalists. Somebody needs to stop them. Yeah, that is it. They're zombies. Yeah, these are zombies. And
no, hold on. Like... Let's get it correct. They're not zombies. Yeah. They portray the same mannerisms as zombies, but they are infected. That's the argument. That is one of the arguments of the Resident Evil 5 drama, is that they're not technically zombies. So they are actually human people. It's more akin to 28 Days Later than it is to a zombie film, if that makes sense. It's almost like a Rage sort of instance. And that is one of the reasons why the race card is coming out, is because they are actually still human beings, so to speak.
Like, I could understand, it's like if every single Resident Evil game was set in Africa and you're only killing black people, where it's like, ah, man, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, maybe it's a duck.
I mean, that is correct, because most Resident Evil games are set in white-dominated areas. So maybe it's the other way around, the racism, you know, who knows? I wouldn't necessarily agree with that either, but, you know, one could argue, hold on, Resident Evil has spent more time killing predominantly white area-based people. Maybe the racism the other way.
But, like, there's, like, what, 15, 20 other games? And this is in one of the games, so it's probably not, like, a racist fantasy of gunning down minorities.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, not even minorities. I mean, that's... You go to Africa, oh, wow, everybody around me is a minority. Like, they're not really even minorities, but, like, what I'm saying is, like, it's just such an insane thing to say.
It's a stretch. It's a massive stretch. It's a massive stretch. That's what it is.
Game's release window, with IGN's own former editor-in-chief Hilary Goldstein having also wrestled with the subject.
Is it racist? So you can't shoot black people in the game? This is a video game. Like, I would understand if it was like something like it's just what is wrong with these people, man? Where are they coming from? This is our culture. I am so sorry if you live in like Brazil, or you live in Korea, or you live in China, or Japan, and you have to deal with our shit.
So that's to say, with that argument, is it a Capcom game? I can't remember. I don't think it is. I think it's Bandai Namco, isn't it? The latest instance of this would be Ghostwire Tokyo. I can't remember if it is a Capcom. Well, who made Ghostwire? Oh, it's Bethesda. Sorry, Bethesda. I knew it was one of them. But Ghostwire Tokyo is literally set in Japan, and you are literally killing just Japanese people. Realistically. Or they are zombies from Japanese people. Is that racist because you're killing Japanese people? Even though it's set in Tokyo?
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'd like to apologize on behalf of all of the bored white people here in America. I'm so sorry we're doing this to you. I really don't want... I didn't want to do this. I'm not part of this. I'm not part of the system.
See, it makes a joke that we're boring other regions with our culture, but Biohazard as a franchise is one of Japan's leading franchises. The whole reason why Biohazard is the way it is because it did so well in the early days in Japan. It was just deliberately westernized, if that makes sense. So Resident Evil 1 or Biohazard 1, even though it was released in Japan, the game, I believe, if I remember rightly, all the characters had to speak American in the game, and it was subtitled with Japanese. Because they wanted to make sure that Japanese people playing it understood it was a Western cultured game. So yeah, he's making a joke that, we're boring them, so to speak, with our culture, but Biohazard is deliberately designed as a Western cultured game.
But holy fuck, yeah, as an American, I apologize. Yeah, I'm just so sorry. Its PR team explained this stuff. I think even Capcom went to try to add more light-skinned enemies among the zombies. Yeah, but I mean, it's just, again, like, it's so weird. You know what I said before about how, like, Western media has to make sure that all media is reinforcing, like, current social norms? Like, all social norms have to be reinforced through media, and you can't actually have media that is a suspension of social norms? I think this is an example of that. This is a really good example of that. Is that these people are unable to, have any degree of willing suspension of disbelief. 2009, by the way.
I mean, that's kind of the whole gaming industry at the minute, realistically, isn't it? That obviously with the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff and that's happening at the minute, and all this cultural appropriation, wokeness, so to speak, in gaming that's happening behind the scenes. I think people do forget that games are designed to take you away from realism. At the moment, everything in culture is about being correct, being culturally correct to minorities, to people with ethnicity and stuff like that, which is fine. In real life, yes, I agree that people should have rights, people should have equal opportunities. However, in video games, the idea of a video game is it's not meant to be realism, unless you're playing like a simulator or something. Which Resident Evil clearly is not a simulator. So, shouldn't be trying to be as factual to life as possible? Or should it be something else? And I would personally stand by it wanting to be something else. And another example of this is Final Fantasy 16. Because Square had to defend the game for having no coloured people in it. Yet it was designed in a way that it was set in an environment that is predominantly a white location. It was designed on like medieval times and those sort of areas where, like, almost like medieval England in a way, so to speak, where coloured people were few and far between. And again, that's not because you know, that's racist. That's because the game they had a very specific game design in mind, and wanted to go down that route to take you away from the realism of life. They wanted to put you in a completely different location and world.
Why? Oh yeah, IGN gave this game a 9 out of 10. By the way, yeah, I'll look at it in a minute.
It wasn't a 9 out of 10 game.
They want
IGN.
everything to reflect their ideology. Exactly. Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to, is that these people are trying to co-opt, you know, like media, and use it as a vehicle to tell their story, right? To push their narrative. It's not about whether something is accurate or not. I mean, anybody knows. I mean, like, there's a lot of places in Africa that really fucking suck. Like, where was Joseph Kony from? So,
I mean, I think the majority of places in Africa probably suck, to be fair, given the massive wealth divide there is in those sort of countries.
And this isn't like a fucking, you're not dissing Africa by saying
Not that I've
this.
ever been.
Like, there's places in the U.S. that are really fucking bad too.
Yeah.
There's places everywhere. Like this.
Same in the UK. We have some really bad areas. So
It's not racist. That's just how it is. Jesus.
But that was 2009, a time when race was apparently a debate rather than a reality. In the 2020s,
Reality? Yeah, that was back whenever people had free speech and they could talk about this kind of stuff without getting worried about getting deplatformed and
that's correct.
having all of their sponsors taken away from them and getting banned on social media. Yeah, it was a conversation because the other normal people could actually speak, and now they can't. You can't even have this type of perspective. This is the problem. It wasn't a reality then.
I mean, it's okay. Again, he's maybe a little bit taking this a little bit left field. I do believe that to an extent, still that freedom of speech does exist. But you know, it is increasingly more difficult to speak on these sort of things.
Yeah, it's just it's incredible.
in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game.
To cancel it.
No.
No, I disagree with that.
Yeah, I do.
No, I really don't think so. And I think also, like, it's very kind of odd to hear this coming from somebody who has an accent that's clearly not American. Like, this is an American issue. Like, what are you doing talking about this?
So the opposite to that would be the Grand Theft Auto series, which one of the main characters is a black character in an area. I mean, obviously in Grand Theft Auto 4, I think it was Russian, wasn't it, if I remember rightly? Is it okay for a Russian to go and do it in America? Is it okay for a black guy to go and shoot up white people in Grand Theft Auto? It's the same story. It's the same question no matter how you look at it. Again, it just comes down to it's a game. It's designed in a particular way. That's all it is. There's nothing more to it.
It's Western culture.
GTA, did they? I don't remember that. Maybe they did. I remember the main character, but I didn't really get on with GTA 4 too well, to be fair, apart from the multiplayer.
I have a job to do, and I'm gonna see it through.
Remakes may be able to redefine their source material, but there's only so many changes you can make until it's not a remake at all, but an entirely new game. And if you take Africa out of Resident Evil 5, is it Resident Evil 5 anymore? Even with a vastly improved, more sensitive take on the continent, perhaps one with a black protagonist and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience...
Well, why you can't put in a black protagonist? Because the protagonist is a main character in the story throughout the games. Yeah, Shiva does come in and does help out, but Chris Redfield is a keystone in Resident Evil history and Resident Evil lore. If you was to rewrite the game and then put somebody else other than Chris Redfield in, you're basically changing the lore of that game. So whilst I wouldn't particularly be bothered if they did that, you've got to be very careful with what you do, because you're going to piss off a whole community of people, essentially.
I would making it a black.
Was it in the DLC? Oh, I do remember. Yeah, I do remember.
Like, it's crazy. Like, what is wrong with these people, man? Like, you've got, like, these people, like, need to be stopped. Like, who is listening to this and thinking, oh, yeah, true?
would simply be too divorced from the original to hold
Not
the
me.
name Resident Evil 5. So where does Capcom go now? Personally, I'd look backwards. Code Veronica is an ideal candidate.
The Ballad of Gay Tony, yeah, I do remember it.
But if the only way is chronologically forward, then a total rewrite of what comes next is the logical path.
See, that's the thing. They're not going to do Code Veronica because it's... I don't think it's the type of game they want to remake, so Resident Evil 5 is the natural choice because it follows the series on.
What followed Resident Evil 4 was not one terrible game, but two. Resident Evil 6 doubled down...
Hold on. It's just called the game terrible, and yet they rated it 9 out of 10. Am I the only person who's thinking, hold on, what the fuck here? He's literally just said his own company rated the game wrong. Yeah?
No, tripled down on the action-packed, set-piece heavy shooter design, to the extent that much of it could be mistaken for a third-person Call of Duty spin-off were it not for the monsters.
Sounds like a game I'd like.
Level design practically puts you in a chokehold, forcing you to endure a barrage of bombastic moments that have no interest in evoking any sense of fear. Resident Evil 6 is a survival horror, only in that it's a horrible game that you have to survive playing. But this time around,
Looks like an
it
arcade
doesn't have
game,
to be
you know?
like that.
Like,
Capcom now has the opportunity
like
to ignore
Crysis
the
or something like
past
that, not
and
Crysis,
completely reinvent this
Time
chunk of the
Crisis?
timeline.
Yeah.
In Resident
See, I didn't think Resident Evil 6 was that bad. I did quite enjoy it.
Evil 4 Remake's post-credit scene, evil mastermind Albert Wesker details his plans for world domination to Ada Wong. Reflected in his glasses is an image of Excella Gione and the Stairway of the Sun, two significant plot elements from Resident Evil 5, which indicates Capcom's intentions. But there's more to consider. This scene is largely a replication of the sequence from Assignment Ada, a non-canon chapter from the original Resident Evil 4. Its shift from unofficial to canon points to a willingness to change. Furthermore, the end of this scene is completely rewritten. When learning of Wesker's plans, rather than dutifully deliver the stolen Las Plagas sample to him, Ada betrays her shadowy boss and forces her helicopter to turn around. In this moment, the future of Resident Evil becomes unclear. Capcom has given itself the freedom to do whatever it wants. I just hope it's not a remake of Resident Evil 5. For more on how Capcom is altering the series, check out our video.
So I'll disagree. I'm up for a Resident Evil 5 remake if they keep it co-op. Because I think Resident Evil 5 at this point needs another co-op game. And if it's not going to be Revelations 3, which realistically it should be, I reckon they should make Revelations 3, then we should get co-op Resident Evil 5 back. Now, like they say, should they completely rewrite it or should they remake it? I personally think there is a middle ground here. I don't think you can change the protagonist. I think you have to keep Chris Redfield in. But there are other options to rewrite that story a little bit better and make it a little bit nicer for 2024, 25 or whatever. But they shouldn't change too much, I don't think. I think the rest of it's quite naturally in the right place. Yeah, it does suck in comparison to how people would like to see it in terms of sensitivity. I'm not going to lie, there is issues there. But I don't think there's any intent or racism behind any of it.
On the biggest changes in Resident Evil 4 Remake. And for everything else, stick with IGN.
No, don't.
Yeah, so anyway,
It's not very often IGN have a good take.
you can tell that this kind of stuff isn't popular because you literally can't even comment on it. And apparently Resident Evil 5, they gave, what was the review? So whenever the game came out, they gave the game a 9 out of 10. Is that right? Verdict. It's a 9, so the game's amazing. Oh my god, where are these people? What is this? Like, people are never going to get over, like, this race shit whenever they look at every interaction between two people of different races as a, like, they just basically turned it into stereotype. It's like everything is removed, the context, the nuance, the reality is removed, and you're just looking at this. Like, we're never going to get past this if every single time that you see a video game where like, you're shooting zombies in Africa, you're thinking about, like, police officers in America shooting people, or, like, George Floyd. Like, what the...
See, this is where the problem lies, because he misconstrues the game a little bit. You're not shooting zombies. That's where the link between the racism and this game is coming from. It's not shooting a zombie, it's shooting an actual person. It's a living being. So that is where that link comes from. However, the comment's still right that he's making. in the terms of it shouldn't be appropriately compared to real life instances. It is a video game. It is designed to be taking you out of that situation. So as long as it makes sense for the story and the plot and the theme and the link to other Resident Evils, it shouldn't be compared to real life instances.
The fuck? Who does this? Like, what's wrong? Like, this, it's such a stupid way of thinking. I think the problem is that these people want to put out like a certain narrative and they don't want other people to like really talk about it. And I think the issue also is like, I mean, they can shut down comments on it. I mean, that's up to them. Like, that's fine. But let's not pretend like we don't know the reason why.
I mean, if we're going to go down the racism card, we could go even further back. I mean, or shall we say the stereotype card, sorry. Does anybody remember the game The Hideout? I think it was called The Hideout on PS2. I think it was called The Hideout. Oh, The Getaway, sorry, it's called The Getaway. This game. So The Getaway, basically. Which was essentially an attempt to make Grand Theft Auto in London. However, it was so over the top, stereotypical, that are we now at the point where we can call everything in this game an offence to British people? Because I would bet you 95% of 95 to 98% of British people would just laugh at this game. And they wouldn't take any offence to it whatsoever.
Special jobs. She used to be on the game until she found her true calling.
What the fuck are you talking about, Harry?
She does some wet jobs. Charlie says they never see it coming from a bird.
What? She's a topper?
Oh yeah, mate. She's not the slightest bit.
See, it's just so over the top British that one could argue: is this the same situation? This is Brits shooting Brits in a very over the top Brit fashion. Are we now talking about being too stereotypical to British people? Because I don't think that conversation has the same impact to, say, the race card. Which, again, people are entitled to have that conversation. But it's the same, just less impactful.
The reason why is because they're going, like, they posted this without having comments enabled, right? It's not like they disabled comments halfway through it. So they knew whenever they posted this,
it was going to be controversial.
It would be extremely unpopular.
Yeah.
They knew that. And are there any comments on this? Oh, there's no comments.
As they won't allow comments on the post
so,
on the page
either. You don't really
either.
know what people are talking about with this either. And so, yeah, do they even allow comments? I mean, on usually, like, if you look at IGN, let me pull up the last 5. We don't need to. We can
see IGN's Twitter is. I would be surprised if their traffic to their website is not significantly decreased from when it was, say, 10 years ago, because IGN rarely have solid takes these days.
See it right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in a general sense, they do. I'm trying to look for another example where they didn't. And it seems like, no, this is actually kind of quite an anomaly. So yeah, on YouTube there are comments, quote retweets on YouTube. Oh yeah, no, I have no doubt that people disagree with this. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that we're ever gonna get over like this kind of like like diluting a person down to race thing. I don't think we're ever gonna be able to get over that as like a culture until people stop viewing every interaction between different races of people as interactions between races of people. And
that's basically the long and short of it.
I actually think that these people are like massively they're very reductive, and I think that they work backwards in terms of like progress of people like being able to see each other, because a normal person can see this and be like, yeah, it's in Africa, of course that's how it is. I don't think anybody, any reasonable like normal person is going to see this and be like, oh wow, this is just like you know, in America where cops shoot black people. Like it's what the fuck?
Yeah,
Who does that?
it's very difficult to make the two comparisons for sure.
Like I feel like that's almost like a self-report. That's incredible. Morgan Freeman once said to end racism, just stop talking about it. Well, I think it's very simple, right? If you want to get rid of people that are racist, you look at the reasons why people are racist, figure out why that is, see if you can, you know, like work with those people. And then after that, I think treating people fairly is the only way you can really do that.
Like, as I was always told, and this is what was drummed into me when I was a child, and I think I could argue the majority of my generation, and probably even other generations in England, you treat people how you want to be treated. That is exactly what was drummed into me as a child. And I'm pretty sure everybody I know had that drummed into them. And that's ultimately what it comes down to me. But yeah, I think we'll stop here because I think the rest of this conversation is just going to be about race rather than the actual game. It's heading down that route of talking more about the race element, and that's not the point of this. It was more to talk about the game. So yeah, we'll stop this here, and I'll watch the rest later or something. But yeah, I just thought I'd highlight it because it was an interesting conversation, and obviously this is linking to this as well on Reddit, which goes back a year ago, which quite a lot before all the wokeness in gaming started to happen. So yeah, definitely interesting.